paranoid about that lately. All right. The Hangout on Air is live, and the Twitter notification does go up, so good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Matee.
And we're talking tonight about Survivor Season 37, David versus Goliath, Episode 4. So, there was ominous forewarning right away in the recap when they reminded us about B's knee. You know, just of like, oh, well, that's probably going to come up then. And I cannot imagine any conceivable good way that it could come up. You know, that they couldn't just handle in a, confessional. If it was just about her having ongoing difficulty or something, why wouldn't they just have her say that in a confessional? So, sure enough, I mean, I guess I'm jumping to the beginning right away, but I don't know. That was just what was on my brain.
Yeah, I mean, let's just start there then.
Yeah. So we went right to the swap. No, no pre-swap scenes at all. We have everyone show up there, and before anything else happens, she announces that she is withdrawing from the game. Probst does not mince words. He repeatedly uses the word quitting, which is technically fair, although he didn't say it in a mean-spirited way, but it's also, I think he's just trying to emphasize for the credibility of the show that it is her decision and not the show's medical team.
Right. Which, I mean, it happens. I mean, like she said, she's an athlete. She needs to go heal. You know? Yeah,
needs to not risk hurting it further, especially if that could, affect her career. That makes perfect sense, and it's just kind of, it's bad enough when you have, that we've already had one person get pulled out this season for medical stuff, and now it's a second person. So even though technically it was her decision this time, but still because of an injury. So I guess, we probably won't have any double eliminations this this season, is my guess.
Nope.
Although I guess technically they didn't have a tribal council after Pat was evacuated. So that one was still one person left the show in that episode. But in any event, everyone's bummed. They comment on how this is 2 setbacks to the David tribe. But of course, doesn't matter that much anymore because we're about to do a mix-up. And I guess it does matter because, of course, one of the first things that is discussed once there's the mix-up is the fact that all 3 tribes consist of 3 Goliath members and 2 David members.
I think they did that on purpose, right?
It seemed like it was random. I mean, I don't know. It wasn't clear. Because in the past, they hand them out randomly. Everyone is taking the little, wrapped package, and then they open it to see what color it is. Usually it's random, and so they didn't say that it was not random, but it also makes sense thematically, I guess. The idea that, Christian talks about it being gerrymandered in favor of the Goliaths. And so does that mean it's deliberate, or is he just talking about how the result ended up?
Yeah, I felt like it was deliberate for exactly that reason. Like it was gerrymandered on purpose because it's thematically correct and that it gave them the advantage in the mix-up. Right.
I mean, and that seems theoretically possible, but they didn't say that either. So I don't know. It seemed like when they were all picking the buffs that they, didn't seem like they were being handed specific ones. But
yeah, but it also,
I mean, to some extent, it could have just worked out that way randomly anyway because, the Goliaths had that many more people.
I feel like Jeff would have expressed more amazement if it randomly happened like that, as opposed to just matter-of-factly stating that it existed. You know,
This makes me wonder if anyone asked him about that, if there's any discussion about that. I didn't look up the Dalton Ross Q&A this week. But in any event, we end up with those three tribes. We have the new Tiva tribe in the Green Buffs, which consists of Christian, John, Gabby, Dan, and Allison. The Buku tribe, which is the Orange Buffs, with Natalia, Davy, Elizabeth, Kara, and Alec. The Jabini tribe with the Purple Buffs, with Natalie, Mike, Lyrsa, Angelina, and Nick. And then, of course, Carl drawing the unlucky buff and getting sent to Exile Island. But in some ways, like, I don't think it's a good thing, even with the gain of finding the advantage, which we'll talk about when we get there. But I still think it's probably not positive, because you're deprived of that opportunity to bond with your new tribe mates, and then you sort of by default get added to whichever one was the losing tribe of the last challenge. So you're guaranteed to get added to the one that has gotten third place out of 3 in at least one challenge.
Yep.
But so, I don't know. I'm curious about the gerrymandering. And then poor Tiva tribe gets the new beach with no shelter on it, so they have to rebuild and build themselves a new shelter. And we had Christian talking a little bit about frustration about the way the numbers worked out. We got the confirmation, if we didn't already know, that the original David tribe had a far superior shelter. Aided by the fact that they got all those supplies and the tools at the beginning, but also just better cooperation and communication when building it.
Yeah. I think, that was the key part that we remember from, it's part of what stacked everybody against, Natalie at the beginning. Like, that was what first kind of led to that.
Right.
But I was happy to see, I know we talked a lot about her last time, and she did seem to, we didn't see a ton from her, but she did seem, while she still maintained that same attitude, like when she started bossing Angelina around, it felt like she does have some renewed life at this point,
Yeah, I think that just, we didn't have the same type of tension as we did when it was Jeremy who had initially approached with like an overture of being helpful, and then because he was rebuked, turned 180 degrees and was against her. So we don't have that dynamic, but we did get shown a couple of times others reacting to her, feeling that she's being bossy. So we'll see, but certainly we didn't have the same level of tension that we saw last time, which is good. And hopefully she'll be able to, find a better chemistry with the new folks there. We have, so Davy and Elizabeth are needing to try to fit in with their new Orange camp. We have Elizabeth immediately bonding with Kara over Christian faith and horses. And it was kind of funny how obvious the dynamic was with the two of them walking around with Natalie, and they're just talking a mile in a minute, and Natalie's kind of like, yeah, like I saw a horse once. Trying to participate, but immediately just sort of feeling like, this is bad news for me, because I thought that I was most close with Kara, and now it seems like on the first day that they're together, she is already closer to Elizabeth than to me. And sure enough, as things turn out. But let's see, we have...
let's get to John and Christian.
Yeah, okay.
This was such a payoff from both of their, well, I don't even know if it's the total payoff, but it's the beginning of it. from both of their kind of, their threads that we've been seeing in their interviews.
Yeah.
Particularly John's, how, there's been so much of him talking about how, the mayor of Slamtown is this persona. He wants people to know him as a John. He's really just a normal kind of goofy guy, and Christian with, his charm apocalypse and like, I'm going to befriend everybody. And then it just sort of culminates to this.
Yeah.
They just play off each other so well because, Christian has realized that he is a real guy and that the Slamtown thing is a persona. So he plays into that.
Yeah.
And Bond plays the persona, but they're both like actually getting along on like a real level. And Bond over this sort of goofy thing.
They kind of click on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was definitely nice to see.
What are the graphics of Slamtown?
It was also nice to see from John, him sort of expressing a little bit something that I kind of related to, which is the idea of it being one thing to be sort of comfortable in a public persona, but that's not who you really are. And when you're trying to be your actual self, suddenly things feel awkward. And, and he's a little bit insecure about that, which I just like, going to sci-fi conventions and stuff like that. It's sometimes easy to kind of be a personality in that sort of setting, as opposed to being my actual self. And it's not that they're that different. And I'm not comparing myself directly so much as I felt like I could understand what he was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, intense version of that normal feeling of like your public persona versus your private persona. His is just so like dramatically different that it makes it interesting.
Yeah.
And again, and I think that's why Christian did such a great job, because he allowed him to feel comfortable by making the jokes about the persona, but not in a demeaning way, but in a play along way, but also was interested in getting to know John as a person. And John kind of liked how Christian, who you would normally see, he's a David, he's really geek, but he's
sorry, you broke up quite a bit in that last sentence.
So then, John also befriending Christian, like he sees in Christian, that, Christian isn't afraid to be himself, and his true self is really geeky and really goofy. And he kind of not envies him, but respects how Christian has sort of owned his persona and his personality are very aligned. And they're just, and, again, to the editing all the way up until this point, it was designed and we both reacted to it in that we are fans of both of them. So when they're getting along and working together like this, it's, even though they haven't actually done anything yet, but that they're having this bond, like it just makes us like them both even more. Like these are my two favorites right now, and they probably were going into this, but it's like set in stone now after this. Like, I'm rooting for them to work together. I'm rooting for them, one of them to win. I'm rooting for them to be able to make this last as long as possible. Like, I just think it's a fun, positive relationship that both guys are smart. Both guys have, interesting things about them. I think it's really cool. So.
No, I agree with all of that. I mean, I guess I hadn't thought about it in quite the context of like favorites per se, but I definitely like both of them, and more than that, like them together.
Right.
And I think that also ties into what we were just talking about. This is obviously happens a bit later in the episode, excuse me, but when Gabby is starting to feel insecure that Christian is doing such a better job at making new relationships with the new former Goliaths, that she's feeling left out as a result. And so she's very emotional, and we see Christian, trying to really work to try to reassure her and help her through that. And I feel like he did a really good job at doing that. And one of the things that he said, what I thought was really important, even though she kind of seemed like she wasn't quite ready to hear it, was when she was talking about feeling intimidated by the Goliaths, and John is kind of mentioned just in the context we were just talking about, but she's feeling intimidated and she feels like she connects more to people who are vulnerable, is the way she puts it. And Christian kind of tries to explain it's like, well, they have their vulnerabilities too. They just don't show them in the same way. And so, don't think of them as having no vulnerabilities. Just it's a little different. But she was kind of, I think, a little bit too wrapped up in her own feelings, at least at that moment in that conversation. I hope that she can kind of get past that, because I like her most of the time, but she does seem to have these sort of mood swings where she bottoms out, and that she's not as compelling in those parts, just because you can sort of feel like whatever game she might be capable of playing when she's up is hindered by those downswings.
Right. Like if she hadn't chosen to expose the side of her to Christian, it might not have gone so well. Like, if someone else, if another group of people sees her like this, it may be concerning, and they may say, man, we can't really work with her because she gets like you said, bottoms out like this. And it's, I don't know if we can trust that if like she can't kind of keep it together. Not they be mad that she's upset, but like she was so upset in this that it was, borderline irrational. I mean, there is a rationality to what made her upset, but it was, you took it to such an extreme. And that's what this made me like. I thought Christian came out of this looking better than anybody, because it gave further proof to what we were just talking about with his relationship with John, is that he has identified that John is a real person with vulnerabilities. Like he knows John has uses that persona and is uncomfortable getting to know people as his real self. And so Christian like gave him that door of, let's make jokes. Let's ease into this by using your public persona, and that will make you feel more comfortable with me, and then we can get to know each other. Like this was just proof that that is actually what he did.
Yeah, yeah. So I agree. I think Christian handled that whole situation extremely well, both as a player and just as a human being responding to a fellow human being in distress. Like really trying to do his best to acknowledge what she's feeling and not dismiss that, but also try to turn it around and help her see another side of it, and to, help maybe identify some solutions to the issues that she's worried about. But all from a very sort of compassionate, friendly place, I thought. And I thought he handled that extremely well. And I think he said all the right things, and she was a little bit too wound up to really absorb it all, I think, but maybe she will, once she's calmed down a little bit.
Yeah, she'll remember what he said and kind of marinate on it. And I just, the last thing I want to talk about with this is that, I think there's also a subtlety here that we don't. It's so easy for the person in Christians, the comforter, to overcommit something. Use that as what to make her feel better. Like, no, like it's you and me to the end. Like I'm gonna get you through. Like he doesn't say any of that stuff. He presents ways that she can improve her game. He assures her that he is a companion of hers, but he never overpromises something just for the sake to make her feel better, which is very difficult to do when you're in that situation, because you want it to. A lot of people just want it to go away, and the easiest thing to say is like, oh yeah, no, I'm with you. I got you, and we're BFFs to the end, and we're aligned, but he never does that.
He was reassuring her on an emotional, interpersonal level as opposed to a strategic level.
Right. When a lot of people, it's just easier to use the strategic, even though they don't mean it to be strategic. It's easier to reassure somebody because you're like, oh no, don't worry. Like I'll make sure you don't get voted out, or I'm aligned with you.
I mean, this is a very recognizable dynamic beyond the mechanics of the game. Of you've got two existing friends, and then one of those two is making new friends in the the other feels a little bit left behind. I mean, that happens all the time in all sorts of circumstances, right? So it's and he kind of responded to her distress on that level, which I agree is good, because once you start bringing the strategy into it, it really changes the tone, and it risks putting yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in for later.
Right, because he's left himself open. Like, let's say this continues and she becomes the next vote for a legitimate purpose, and he wants to work with John, and he sees that as his better game plan, and he needs to vote for her. Or even more so, let's say it's further down the line and she makes the jury, and then he has to turn on her. If he's made some arbitrary promise just to make her feel better here, now he's not just turning on somebody he was aligned with, he's breaking a promise. And those are there's a level in that where he, that he can't, makes it much more difficult to navigate when you get to the end and you're like, when I was feeling down, you promised me that we were going to go to the end. And he's just like, yeah, I said it then, but things change. As opposed to, hey, I was always supportive of you, and this just happened to be the right thing at the time, and it was a very hard decision for me, but I knew that we would maintain a relationship outside of this, and I did what was best for me in the game. Like, that just diffuses everything, and he has put himself in a position if he needs that later. And again, I don't know that he was doing it strategically. I think he's just really good at reading people, which is not a quality you expect out of him, because that's a lot of times with people who are that kind of goofy, and are socially awkward. Part of their social awkwardness is their inability to read social cues and to read people. And he actually has an incredible ability with that.
Oh yeah, I think he does. And as far as strategy, the elements of it, I mean, it's impossible to ignore that there's an aspect of that, because if he wants to continue to work with her, she is his ally, and he would like to bring her along, then it is in his interest to help her not just not be feeling bad, but also to go ahead and make those connections that she is fearing that she is missing out on, right? But also, at least there's no dissonance between that strategy and the actual human compassion and sincerity of, this is someone I like, someone who I feel like I'm friends with now, who's feeling really bummed, and I want to reassure them.
Yep.
So that, I mean, I'm glad we jumped ahead to that, just because, it's some interesting stuff, but we did skip past a few things. We skipped past Carl on Exile Island. I did like the whole idea of there being sort of a natural timer on this advantage, like the possibility that he could have not gotten the coconut if he wasn't fast enough or grabbed the wrong one, because we saw a whole bunch of them getting away. So it seems like it's theoretically possible that the one important one might have gotten away.
Yeah, I mean, there's a strategy to it. Like, I think that he did well, which was just save as many coconuts as opposed to try to identify it in the water.
Yeah, but it seemed clear that, he didn't notice the special one when he grabbed it. He was just grabbing a bunch of them, and it wasn't until after he had said, well, I don't think I can get any more of them, that he looked back at the ones that he had already grabbed.
I mean, that seemed to be his strategy. Was he missed it because he wasn't looking for that at the time. It was, he sacrificed speed of salvaging coconuts for identification of the special one. And it worked out for him, so.
Yeah. Or rather, it seemed to me like he didn't do that. The
opposite. Sorry, sacrifice identification for.
Right.
Sorry. Yes.
That's okay. I just want to make sure we were on the same page. So the advantage is interesting, an idle nullifier, but not one that can be played after the idol is played. You have to play it with the vote, which is an extra layer of complication. There was a part of me that kind of felt like I wanted it to be able to nullify an idol, but I guess it makes it more nuanced and a little trickier. It's not nearly as powerful as if you could play it after someone plays an idol.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I liked this because I felt like that would have been too powerful of a tool. Because this makes not just a little bit more complexity with how you use it, but also how you share it if you want to try to leverage something ahead of time. Like if you need votes on your side when you plan to nullify the idol, and you have to share this ahead of time. If you do that incorrectly, then the person can go and say, hey, Carl's got this idol nullifier. We need to make sure he thinks it's person A that has the idol, and we need to play it for person B. If he misses, like, it gives him an opportunity where if he doesn't have to, he doesn't have any risk.
Right.
Now he has risk because he has to be very careful with who he chooses.
Yeah.
Whereas with the other one, he's just like, yeah, just wait around, and if it's time to nullify the idol, I nullify the idol. Like, that's way too powerful, and again, less burden on him to use it correctly.
And it kind of short circuits the strategy that we've seen people use sometimes, which is to announce that they have an idol.
Yes.
So certainly if someone makes it clear, you guys can vote for me this time if you want, but I'm just going to play an idol, so it doesn't matter. And it's a way to counteract that. Which is nice, just because I think there have been times where it was just frustrating, where if someone had an idol and it just feels like they're untouchable as a result.
Well, yeah, and especially if Carl leverages us correctly, because what he could say is, if he tells people that ahead of time, hey, if they try to wield their idol as power, we need to tell them, like, you definitely need to use it because we're going to vote for you, and then we can split the votes, and then I can nullify his or her idol. But we have to we force them to use it because we put the majority on them, as opposed to being scared that we necessarily can't do it because the person who's going to be second in the votes, doesn't want to go along with that, because if he does use the idol, then they go home.
Right.
You can get more people on board potentially.
Well, so it's an interesting aspect too, tying into the theme also in a subtle way, because if you think about it, this is an advantage that only benefits the majority. Because the only way that the person whose idol you nullify still goes home is if you still also had the majority of the votes for them.
Oh, yeah, it's true.
So the idea of an idol, like, part of what the power of that is...
Unless there are two idols played.
That's true. That's true. If there's two idols, nullify one, not the other. Yeah. Well, we'll see how that goes. Although I think sometimes what happens when they have these advantages that are complicated in their use is that they don't end up being played effectively, because it's hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, based on history, what's likely to happen is that he's going to play it, and whoever he was meaning to get won't use their idol, and then it just goes to nothing. And either that person gets voted out because they didn't use their idol, or he was incorrect in what was going to happen, and he blew up his thing. And because that's the other risk about sharing it, is like, okay, again, everybody can say, look, we need to make sure Carl thinks everybody is voting for this person, and they are going to play their idol. And we really vote for this other person because we don't want to get rid of that person. He'll use his advantage, so we don't have to worry about it anymore, and we get rid of the person that we actually want to get rid of.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I'm optimistic about it. I don't think it is as convoluted as some of the other ones. I think that there are, because it has risks associated, it may not work, but I think that it might be more interesting of an element. I'm just optimistic. Yeah.
And I guess just to sort of close the book on everything with Elizabeth and Kara and Natalia, at least in this early portion, I guess I just want to say I feel like I still kind of like Elizabeth. And so I sort of feel like I like her making a new strong ally and then leveraging that. to do stuff. I feel like I liked to see that. So let's see. We get also the Jabini tribe, where Mike talks about how it's the Davids of the Davids that ended up on that tribe. There's concern that they have the weakest people there. We have Natalie talking about wanting to, one of the things that we worried, we worried about, people worried about when the talk was to get rid of Natalie or Jeremy was like, well, was Natalie actually loyal or not? And as it would seem, is she absolutely is. She is very committed to maintaining the Goliath numbers and not open to switching teams, so to speak. Mike does seem like he's still sort of, he's noticing that her demeanor, though. We have Mike and Nick forming the Rock Stars Alliance.
Yeah.
Sure.
There was a funny. I read in the USA Today columnist recap of this because it's also pretty funny. It's a little bit shorter than Dalton Ross's. And he said something tells me that the wherever he's from, the defendants in Williamsburg, Kentucky, always get the earliest plea bargain possible because Nick is always just like, let's do this deal, let's do it. Yep. We're in the alliance, we got a name.
Nice.
Because he's a lawyer, obviously.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But he's always willing to jump for the first thing that comes his way.
Right. He just wants to make deals.
Yep.
Yeah. So we this is also where the John and Christian stuff actually happened, but we talked about that a bit already. Also Christian and Gabby, and that pretty much brings us up to the immunity challenge. I liked a lot of the pieces of this. The whole little the driving wheel thing, with the collar and the blindfolds was neat, and then also having that follow up with a puzzle as well, or a maze rather. The ball in the maze, and I thought it was a good challenge.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a lot to talk about through the middle of it. The idea is the first two tribes get immunity. The first place also gets coffee and pastries. I liked seeing Green do so well, especially with Gabby as caller, because it just made me hopeful that she would be able to, cheer up a little bit and, feel like she's contributed and therefore not feel like such an outsider in that group.
Well, even more than just contributing, I think hopefully the people that she is nervous aren't accepting of her will be giving her genuine praise and congratulations, which will help her understand that she's not this total outsider.
Right.
So outside of the confidence she gets, they're going to...
Yeah. She has proved that she can contribute not just to her tribe mates, but to herself. Right. And in the meantime, we had Purple was in second place for the longest time, but then they did end up with second place, but Orange basically closed the gap almost right up to the end. And it was really just that very difficult last portion. Purple had been working on it for a while when Orange finally just got there. So ultimately, Purple, the Jabini tribe, was able to pull out second place. And so we have the Buku tribe in the Orange Buffs forced to go to tribal council. Yep. We begin with Kara apologizing just because she was the caller. So she's kind of just, the recognition that she's kind of the most prominent position. And, it seems like it was really that first stage where they got held up the most, though. So I don't, I guess, I mean, she's still responsible for that one too. So
Yeah.
yeah. Elizabeth and Davy figure that it seems pretty likely that it's going to be one or the other of them at this point anyway. And it's kind of interesting that they both go idol hunting together, even though Davy reminds us in the confessional that he has the idol already. So he does not tell Elizabeth that, but just goes idol hunting with her just to sort of be friendly and helpful, even though he knows he has it already. I kind of like I like that in the strategic sense. I mean, it's kind of, it's not the sincere, genuine thing to do, but it is good strategy, especially if he's thinking at this point the most likely thing that will happen is that I'm going to have to vote for her in order to have solidarity with the others, because otherwise it'll be me to do that, and that's what he's thinking at that moment is the most likely, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, especially since he would really rather not have to use his idol so early. Especially if it's to save someone else rather than himself. In the meantime, Natalia is 100% convinced that it needs to be Elizabeth, and her conviction is based entirely on the fact that Elizabeth's moving in on her turf, so to speak, connecting with Kara when Natalia wanted Kara to be her ally.
Right.
In the meantime, I wonder if it's because she's picking up on that dynamic, or maybe just because she had connected more with Kara and Alec. But Elizabeth is also, pitching that maybe Natalia is who they should target instead of Davy. And, she talks about making moves, but he worries about are we tipping our hand too soon? And Elizabeth does say at this point that she would be willing to vote for Davy if it looks like no one is willing to go for voting for Natalia. In the meantime, we have, what we see is Natalia so convinced that it needs to be Elizabeth, and yet feeling paranoid and anxious that she turned it all into kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Her concern that she might be targeted leads to behavior that seems like it contributed to them actually deciding to vote her out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm not 100% convinced this was like the best strategic move. I mean, I get where Alec was coming from, but her behavior is what prompted all of this.
Yeah.
It became, like you said, self-fulfilling in the fact that, like, when Alec is considering it and then he sees her behave like this and act like this, he's like, why would I want to stick around with that person? Even if it technically, the numbers make more sense and I should deal with it later. I just don't want to be around her,
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I was feeling. And because of that, this wasn't as much of a shock to me as I think it was intended to be, because it was it just was so clear to me that she was just became really unpleasant, and super paranoid and all the things that make people go, you know what, we weren't really considering that, but maybe we should.
Yeah. He talks to the camera about feeling like Natalia isn't really listening to him. She is so convinced that she's not willing to entertain any discussion of anything else. And he felt frustrated. And then she was so insistent on browbeating Davy into promising to vote for Elizabeth that Kara and Alec kind of don't like that attitude about it of hey, if the three of us, as in Natalia and Kara and Alec, are agreed with each other, It doesn't matter who the others vote for. And so to be so kind of aggressive in demanding the loyalty from one of the two people that theoretically is getting voted out, it's off-putting.
Yeah.
You know, and it also suggests insecurity, which we know is true. And that's also just like, yeah, she's kind of, she's going on the offensive when, from the perspective of the people she's attacking, she didn't actually need to, but because she did, that's sort of what makes it all happen.
Right.
In the meantime, so that kind of, Alec tells the camera that he's going to decide on the spot because, on the one hand, he thinks it would be interesting to do the flip, but it does disrupt the whole numbers element because when Carl comes back, that the numbers are flipped. But in the meantime,
but he is part of those numbers now.
Yeah, well, right. Like he is joined with, the idea of, he has joined that side and would have to hope that, Elizabeth is appropriately grateful. And she seems like she would be. She seems like she's a pretty straightforward kind of woman,
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Yeah, me as opposed to the idea of like, well, you betrayed your alliance. Why should I trust you? That sort of thing. It doesn't.
Right, you also have to hope that, I mean, they are not dramatically like behind the other tribes. And remember, you've got a 2 out of 3 shot in not having to go to tribal council. So it's not like they're guaranteed to like come back here soon,
Right.
So there's, I calculated worth it based on how Natalia acted.
Yeah.
And she seemed less trustworthy in the long run because of her actions than Elizabeth did.
Right. She kind of got paranoid, and it was sort of a vicious cycle because she became paranoid in response to something that was actually a real concern. But in her escalating paranoia, she worsened the problem. So that brings us to tribal council. I thought it was neat that Carl got to watch the tribal council instead of just joining them afterwards.
Yes.
I enjoyed Elizabeth responding to Probst's question by saying, "I'm concerned, man. I was about to poop my pants today." I just just rattle that off. That's just,
Yep.
She just talks kind of like the sort of the cliche girl cowboy, I mean, in a good way. Like, that's not a criticism at all. It's more like I enjoy the archetype of it.
No, I know what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah. Like Jessie from Toy Story. Or Applejack from My Little Pony, whom I've previously compared her to. But anyway, we have Davy also talking about making his case, and it's it's interesting at this point because it seems to me that it really was undecided. Like what Davy is saying at the beginning could have been bluff, but it came across more to me like he was still assuming it is probably himself or Elizabeth. Because the whole bit with Alec actually standing up in the middle of the tribal council to whisper to Elizabeth, like, there's no gain in that if it was really already decided, right? Like, you don't gain anything from that, I don't think. Because if it's a bluff to begin with, why disrupt it?
Right.
So I think Davy went in maybe hopeful that Alec would help them out, but not counting on it, and still assuming that it was maybe going to come down to, either either there's 4 votes for Elizabeth or 4 votes for Davy. But I think after everything, Natalia talks about how having the game actually get started is exciting. But then she says something really weird about, like, I'd really be happy with my game so far, even if I got voted out this time. And I'm like, why would you ever say that?
She didn't seem that happy when she got voted out.
Well, I think, once she actually got voted out, I mean, I think it was when she said this part, I don't think she had any idea. I think that she was confident that she had locked everyone down. And it was only when Alec, kind of in the middle of the conversation, stands up to whisper in Elizabeth's ear. And then, of course, when that happens, Natalia is 100% correct to say, dude, what the hell?
Yeah.
There is no reason for you to do that if you're not betraying me. There's no conceivable explanation for what you just did other than that. And then, of course, he's like, I just wanted to make sure everyone is on the same page. And she's like, so you whispered to one person? And then lots of whispering back and forth. He whispers to Kara, although it would seem that he whispered to Kara that he was not changing his vote. That seemed to be her reaction to whatever he whispered to her, especially given what had all happened afterwards. Kara at one point tries to tell Natalia that she's being paranoid. So it's actually interesting, I think, that Natalia's paranoia from the beginning was primarily focused on the appearance of Elizabeth disrupting Natalia's relationship with Kara, when ultimately Kara was the only one that stuck with her.
Yep.
And it was Alec that flipped and managed to communicate that too. I loved Davy, though, during that whole thing of knowing what he had been trying to persuade Alec to do, and therefore recognizing what must be happening when Alec was whispering, and not having to have the whispers to him made for him to understand what was happening. Because I think it was all pretty clear to everyone except Kara, ultimately. Like Natalia saw the writing on the wall as soon as that whispering was happening. And Kara was trying to calm her down because she was just like, well, but why? And so sure enough, Kara's jaw drops as Natalia is voted out. Davy did not play his idol. And Natalia did get some nice lines as she was getting voted out. Just sympathetically, but amusingly frustrated and irritated as she's leaving. Like Alec, she's getting up and Alec says sorry, and she's like, "Don't be sorry, shut up." And I liked that too, just because it's this sort of thing like, no, I don't accept your apology. And honestly, why should she? I mean, it's one thing to say, like at the end, are you still mad, or is it playing the game? But yeah, I mean, at this point, yeah, she's pissed because she just got voted out in a surprise vote and all that. So I liked that. And then I liked her sort of grumbling to Probst, like, do put it here, like just the torch, and like, where do I sit it? And she's just mad. Just like kicks a little rock as she's walking out. All of that was good stuff, I thought.
It was really good. I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. And I liked Natalia fine. I mean, I think ultimately, as we've discussed sort of already, she did do it to herself. But I liked her on TV, and feel like, in theory, it's possible that she could. I don't know that I'm eager to say yes, bring her back, but I wouldn't mind. So that brings us to the end. Next time we see Kara is pissed at Alec because obviously. That said, this is a perfect example of something we've talked about before, which is it is 100% understandable why Kara would be pissed at Alec. However, this is one of those circumstances where it would be better strategically if you were able to keep your emotions in check in that situation. Because if she makes him the bad guy and holds it against him, she is now the only one on her tribe who is not on that team. Whereas if she can say, oh, well, you surprised me by changing your vote, but I'm not mad and I still want to work with you guys, is a very different chemistry than, I can't believe you did that to me. I'm furious with you. And now I'm the outlier in this group of 5 people.
Right. You just make it a group of 5 people who is clearly willing to vote out somebody who has made themselves seem like the person that should be voted out, even if they're not the best choice.
Yeah. And then we see that there's going to be another big storm, apparently. In her final words, Natalia regrets not trusting her gut, which is, I'm not sure that's obviously they do these final words like right away when it's all still fresh. So, you can, but I would imagine, I would hope that once she's calmed down a little bit, that's not her takeaway, because ultimately that wasn't really the issue, right? It was her gut. It was her response to her suspicion that ultimately is what did her in.
Right. It was her all of the shenanigans around trying to decide whether or not to trust her gut.
Yeah.
And her gut wasn't actually right at the time. It was right that there was a conversation about getting rid of her. Mm-hmm. It became the reality because of her response to that,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this game's hard. You're playing against real people and they're playing back.
Yep.
But in any event, we'll see what happens next time with episode 5. I think we're planning to be recording on Thursday again. But I think at this point, I also want to just give the listeners a heads up that I have got a new work assignment that is going to be taking me to South Korea starting at the end of October. And so it remains to be seen how easy it will be to continue doing this podcast while I'm there. Hopefully we can. We're going to try to find a way, but there are many unknowns still in the situation. So we will post additional information as it becomes available on that regard. But I think we're going to still be able to record for next week before I leave. So that one should be normal. All right. So I think that'll do it for this time. Thanks, everybody. And we'll be back for more Survivor.
Yes.
Good night, everybody.
The short term.